Welcome to Alan Skorski Reports. I'm Alan Skorski. Since October 7th of 2023, the Jewish people have experienced record levels of anti-Semitism not seen since 1930s Germany. Back then, it was Nazi-inspired anti-Semitism. Today, it is Islamist and Palestinianist-inspired anti-Semitism. On college campuses, students have come from over 5,000 miles away to do the bidding of their masters in the Middle East to attack Jews and Jewish institutions by infiltrating the media, Congress, academia, and the professions in healthcare and our legal system with the sole purpose of driving U.S. policy against Israel and Jews. Their dominance on U.S. elite university campuses have led to physical and verbal attacks against Jews. But lest anyone think that this Islamist movement is just about Israel and the Jews, today's guest has done tremendous research exposing their anti-police, anti-capitalist, and anti-America agenda. Like they say, first they come for the Jews, then they are coming for the rest of you. Today's guest is Ryan Mauro from the Capital Research Center, who is the investigative researcher of extremist groups and whose in-depth work has exposed the Hamas charities and activities that seek to undermine America and take anti-Semitism to a whole new level never seen before in the streets of the United States. A sampling of his research includes When Charities Betray America, How Pro-Palestinian Protest Groups Promote Anti-Americanism. Another paper is headlined Pro-Hamas Extremism Taking Root in the U.S. And another paper is titled A New Study Reveals Pro-Palestinian Groups Promote Violence and Anti-Americanism. Ryan, it's an honor to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, usually I have a question, it's a small one, and I can do it by heart. But there is so much here, I'm actually going to read it, okay?
All right.
So it begins with, there is so much here to unpack. To all those whom for decades thought this was just a war about land vis-a-vis Israel and the Palestinians, it's just about Arabs and Jews who too stubborn to make a deal, what you have uncovered that this is a global war to undermine and defeat liberal Western civilization. Last week, a Christian-sponsored pro-Israel convention was canceled due to jihadist threats. This past Friday, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security issued a public service announcement to highlight public safety concerns for Jewish and Israeli communities. And today in Los Angeles, the Trump administration dispatched the National Guard to protect ICE agents, while Democrat Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries vows to unmask all ICE agents. Ryan Mauro, I guess my first question is, what the hell is going on here?
What you're looking at is a network that wants to create an insurgency. And they say it all the time, but people miss it. And one of the problems that we have, I think, is that there's so many of these groups that are bad that are out there, and there's so many reporters and writers covering them. I mean, where our side is doing a good job of that. But when you just keep hearing about all these different groups that are bad, it's not brought together to where you can actually see how bad it is. Like, right. You're not going to remember like, oh, that was 30 groups. You're just going to remember, oh, it was a lot. And so that's why I've kind of embarked on this series of studies with Capital Research Center, because I first wanted to answer the question when these protests began after October 7th, like what proportion of the groups behind the protests are actually bad guys? Because I knew bad guys are going to exploit it. It happens in every type of popular cause. And so I thought I'd find some interesting things there. But I figured the most would not be like pro-Hamas. And what I found is almost all of them were. Right. Of those that weren't, some of them would be nonviolent, but they still called for destroying Israel. Some would criticize Hamas because they went after non-combatants, but they say go ahead and kill Israeli soldiers, which is still wrong. I don't love the argument of where it just focuses just on civilians. I mean, going after the soldier, that's not doing anything for it to you. I think it's just as wrong, especially because Israel is, defending itself. So it's just wrong no matter what. And so I think I only came across like one or two groups involved in the protest that actually said two-state solution, nonviolence, everything that you want someone rational to say. And then you put it together and it really is a network. I mean, it is what an insurgency kind of looks like if you study them in the Middle East.
Right. So here's what's interesting. You cited that there are close to 500 groups, pro-Palestinian groups. Now, I'm familiar and I'm out there and I'm familiar with Students for Justice in Palestine, the BDS groups within our lifetime, but you've uncovered many other groups, including Unity of Fields. And you've uncovered that a lot of the research and a lot of the likes, and again, I wrote all this stuff down here, that these are groups, they're more than just anti-Israel. They are anti-America. Now, there's another group called Memory Middle East Media Research Institute,
Yes.
and they monitor everything coming out of the Islamic world. And if I had a nickel for every imam based in America calling for the destruction of Israel, calling for the overturning of our democracy and opposing Sharia law, I'd be a really wealthy guy. Yet all of this is being ignored. And again, it boggles the mind. Like I tell people, you're allowed to be anti-Semitic. It's America. You don't like Jews. I don't really care. But it's so much deeper than that. They are coming for America. It's in the streets. They are calling for violence. You see the attacks on police. And to me, like I think to myself, a lot of people don't know that much about Israel. It's 5,000 miles away. They don't know about the conflict. They don't know the history. But if I was trying to win people over to my side, punching cops in the face, comparing cops to the KKK is not what I'd be doing. And yet that's exactly what these Hamas activists are doing. And they're almost proud of it.
Yeah, they think they'll become social media stars this way. Because one of the dangers of the online world is that everyone outside in your life may think you're total, I don't know what, jerk for doing that type of thing, trying to not say a bad word. And that usually is a deterrent socially, like, oh, I'll go out and everyone. But when you're online, and these people are very online, you can surround yourself with people who will celebrate you for that, or you might even compete with, and so that's taken away because their real world is the online world, and it's a very dangerous ecosystem of hate, is what I call it, because you'll see all types of extremists in there: Islamists, anarchists, communists. You'll see white supremacists as well,
Right.
Where even if they're fighting with each other, the same messaging is going around, and it's basically, it's called accelerationism. That it is a good thing for there to be civil conflict and for it to intensify. All sides want to intensify it and fight each other as part of that, but get everyone else caught in between, cause the system to break down, and then each one of the believers in one of these extremist ideologies thinks that when you destroy the system, what will arise is their ideology, because that's the natural state of what man wants, and so these groups just all kind of want that, and that's why I view it as one thing. I call it the seditionist movement. And so people say, how can you put the so-called far left with the far right? I'm like, because I see the ecosystem. It's the same ecosystem. And yeah, that's why they're going after cops. It's not that they lost their temper. It's ideologically, that is a legitimate target for an insurgency. That's what they're trying to make happen.
See, it's interesting because you mentioned the far right. For as long as I've been around, you have the knuckleheads like the David Dukes, the Nick Fuentes. To me, these guys are just losers. Yes, they've got their followers. They got a few thousand of them. They hate Jews. They hate minorities. They don't like the government very much, but they were never gaining any traction. If you remember during the Charlottesville protests, you had 30, 40 of these, knuckleheads running around saying, Jews will not replace us. There were only 30 or 40 of them. You get hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinianists and Islamists who are taking charge of this. So for them, it's easy for them to just piggyback off of them. If you look at the Columbia rallies or the Harvard rallies, they're dominating wide across these massive buildings and taking over. And the universities aren't doing a damn thing about it. I went to Wayne State University in Detroit like 40 years ago, and we had pro-PLO activism. But it was nothing like it is today. Again, like you mentioned, you've got social media. Back then, there was no social media. But it seems almost like they're targeting, and Mahmoud Khalil. I think you also wrote about him in one of your papers, and you can talk about that. He came here, I think, in his 30s. Most people are going to college unless they're going back for a master's degree or something because they want to change careers. But he's come here in his 30s, not to get a master's degree, even if he got one. It's to carry the Hamas mantra here.
Yeah. So when I did the first study, I identified over 150 groups behind these protests that are pro-terrorism. And when I say pro-terrorism, I mean by a high threshold. Like there were groups that were obviously pro-terrorism based on the context what they're saying, but if it wasn't explicit, I didn't include them. So
Right.
I can't. So, but you look at all the ones that are the most heavily involved, and that's how I came to the number. Over 150 of them are like pro-Hamas, or everyone talks about Hamas, but the other big one, in fact, I would say is an even bigger threat in the U.S. is PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine,
Right.
because it's a Marxist group, and a lot of anarchists like them as well. There is a larger contingency for that in the United States than there is for the Islamist jihadist element. And so that's why you have a lot of these groups that are pro-Hamas, but they're actually spending more of their time praising PFLP, which also took part in the October 7th attacks. So that's how you can see that fusion happen. So anyway, I found those over 150 groups. So to me, that proved that the network behind the protest, not each individual, not the students overall individually, wasn't a poll like that. But if you look at the infrastructure of the groups, this is like a Hamas PFLP operation. It is. I think we proved that. But then what we also proved in this other study that we did, we looked at about 500 of the top, what they call pro-Palestinian, even though I don't think they're pro-Palestinian because everything that they do is horrible for Palestinians. But the top 500 activists and groups that call themselves pro-Palestinian and brand themselves as such. And we looked at the 15 months prior to the October 7th attacks and 15 months after the attacks, say like, what did anything change here?
Right.
And what we found is that there was a 186% increase in anti-American content. The amount of engagement, like people interacting with posts, the viewership absolutely skyrocketed. And the calls for violence on American soil increased by, I believe it was 3,000, 3,000%.
Right.
And so we were able to conclude from that now based on the rhetoric, you can define these so-called pro-Palestinian groups as actually anti-American, just based on an analysis of what they're saying and how it's increased and how it's changed, and increasingly violent, obviously. And that's what you're seeing. And the first study I did, Marching Towards Violence, about this, that's what it's called, Marching Towards Violence. The conclusion of it was all about how they're going to morph into an anti-police wannabe insurgency. Like they actually wrote it in articles and said, like they said, you know, the Middle East cause doesn't have staying power. It comes up in the headlines and then goes away. But you know what's always around? Those like racial issues with the police, you know, the F the police type stuff.
Right.
That's always around. So instead of having to lose our infrastructure, because this is a very special opportunity in their mind because everyone came together. But if the issue goes away, you lose all that. So you got to keep everyone engaged and still networked. And the way to do that is through anti-police fighting. And that's what you're seeing. It's not really about ICE, not even about deportation and illegal immigration. It's just that was the moment for them to start transferring things into an anti-police insurgency.
Just out of curiosity, besides the anti-police stuff, what else have you found that which show that they're anti-Americanism? And I'll tell you what makes me think about it. With the George Floyd thing, Derek Chauvin and the police, and there were groups here saying that these police were trained by the IDF on how to oppress blacks and minorities. And there was a mural of George Floyd with a keffiyeh around his neck in Minnesota. And you've got groups here, Nick. You've got the Linda Sarsours here. And now you've got a mayoral race where the guy in second place behind Andrew Cuomo, a complete narcissist and corrupt guy, and I actually want him to win because the guy behind him is an Islamist. And that's how bad it's gotten here. So what are you saying besides like the anti-police stuff that shows you that there is a much larger agenda involved here? Is it anti-American? Is it anti-white? Is it anti-Christian? Is it anti-democracy?
The anti-Christian stuff is less than you'd think. But if you look at like what some of the really hardcore Antifa militants say in their chats, they do want to widen it and go after churches under various pretexts. So that church is part of promoting fascism because they're pro-Trump. They're part of fascism because they're pro-life. So they find all these reasons to say, oh, well, it's not really like an attack on Christianity and churches. It's just what they do, but it applies to most churches. We feel that they're weak on child molestation. That's another thing. So you can always find a reason to do this stuff. They're very anti-Hindu, anti-Indian, I've seen, because of the conflict between India and Pakistan. And so people haven't, once that becomes a thing, and it will, where everyone realizes like, oh, we have an anti-Indian, anti-Hindu network in the U.S., I think it's going to start clicking for people like, what is this? It's not about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Arab-Israeli conflict, because like, oh, well, now you're going after Indians and Hindus. Like what's the common denominator here? And it's just being on the extremist Islamist side in those cases. Anti-capitalist is a big thing. Almost all of them will say that. Some of them will qualify and say racial capitalism or crony capitalism, anti-patriarchy, anti-homophobia. All that type of stuff is kind of like thrown in there. But when it comes to the U.S. and Israel, perhaps the most important pattern that you'll see is it's not that they hate America because America gives aid to Israel. They talk about that a lot as a leading example, but if you look at what they say under it, when they give a bigger explanation, they hate Israel because they hate America.
Right.
It always comes back to around, well, Israel is the stooge of American imperialism. America is evil. Why? Because it's a settler colonial society, or colonial settlerist colony. And it's racist, and it had slavery, and they're horrible to the Native Americans, and they're capitalists, and it all comes from that. And one of the big themes going around is called abolish colonial borders.
Right.
What's that saying is destroy the United States.
Right.
People have to come to that realization that for every time they talk about destroying Israel by saying, advocating it by saying from the river to the sea, or free all of Palestine. I don't call it Israel, I call it Palestine. They do the same thing with the U.S. They'll call the U.S. Turtle Island, based off of a Native American myth that we don't really need to get into, but it's the same premise. Israel is really Palestine. The United States and Canada is really Turtle Island, and therefore should be destroyed. But Americans are not familiar with this term, Turtle Island, why they would say so-called United States, as they often do, and what all of that means. And if they did, they would realize, like, they're going after Israel the same way they go after America, and vice versa. It's the same thing, and that's the common denominator, is hating the West.
Yeah. So it's interesting because you had mentioned in one of your reports the slogans that incite violence: globalize the Intifada, which is bring the violence here, from the river to the sea. And there's another one. It's free Palestine, because in those two words, there are three lies. One, the word free, as if someone is not free. Palestine, as if there is an Arab country called Palestine. And the third lie is that somehow Israel is guilty of holding this non-existent country under siege. So all of these lies together with apartheid, with genocide, and it's being propagated in Congress. The Ilhan Omars and the Tlaibs. Yes, you've got this squad, and those are just idiots. I mean, AOC is such an idiot. But she kind of, likes flirting with her hair and, being this cutesy little girl, but she's an idiot. But Omar and Tlaib, they know exactly what they're doing. And nobody in Congress is trying to shut them down. You have Hakeem Jeffries, who's the leader of the Democrat Party. And it sickens me that AIPAC, this pro-Israel lobbyist group, has a relationship with a guy who won't shut down the vile anti-Semites in his own party who are stirring up all this stuff. Both of them, I know at least Omar was. I think she went to Columbia last year or the year before to support the student encampments. There's nothing being done on the campuses by members of Congress, and I mentioned academia and the media. So I don't know what you have found in there, any type of collaboration.
Ilhan Omar's daughter was an organizer with Students for Justice in Palestine at Columbia, as well as Columbia University Apartheid Divest,
which is called CUAD,
the coalition that Mahmoud Khalil is part of. And it was funny because that group, the CUAD, kept popping up on my radar, and people weren't really paying too much attention to it. But in their world, they were. And so I saw that, and so I started keeping track of them, and I've taken screenshots of all the crazy stuff they were saying, like promoting burning things down, as extreme as you could get, talking about getting training from overseas militants, destroying the U.S., violence against the U.S., just the furthest possible extent you could ever imagine.
Right.
And then when the Trump administration came out and started deporting Mahmoud Khalil, and I still think it's puzzling why they chose him, but they didn't provide the evidence. Like the criticism was accurate that way.
Right.
I don't blame people for saying, well, like you're saying he supports terrorism, but where's the evidence? And luckily I had the evidence, so I posted it out there. And now some of the activist groups that are on the side of Khalil are saying that the Department of Homeland Security is relying on my report to further the deportation proceedings, which is great to hear.
Right.
But I would like to know, why was that hard for me to get that stuff? Like, why would you make this guy the face of your efforts to deport pro-terror students, him out of everybody, but then not immediately come out with, look at all these posts from his group?
Right.
I like something's broken in there.
So interesting that you say that, because last week I interviewed a Rabbi Dr. Mark Goldfeder, and he, I think, is doing some work with David Schoen, one of Trump's former impeachment attorneys. And his organization called National Jewish Advocacy Center, they have all these documents from Mahmoud Khalil, in his own words, and showing what he was distributing, including recruitment for Hamas. So the documents are there, but like you know, I don't know who's got them. I don't know who promoted them first. They do exist. And now that you mentioned why they picked him, I'm trying to think why he stands out. I'm sure it'll come to me later on. But there are many other students, though, who they're going to be going after. And again, the question comes down to who's defending people like him? Why are they defending people like him? And what other students is there more ammunition on? Like you mentioned that you found ammunition on him. Were there other students that you say, oh my God, if you think you got the goods on him, look what I got on these other students?
Yeah, I did. I don't remember the names, but I have like thousands of screenshots. And so do other organizations. And people blatantly saying things in their own words on their own media account. Like there's enough ones you could have gone after the smoking guns first,
right,
before taking a gamble like this. Because what the far left anarchists, especially the Antifa types, do now is they like to say their organization is autonomous, that has no hierarchy. And so what that means is no one has an official title. And so Mahmoud Khalil obviously was a leader of that group. I mean, he was negotiating with the school on their behalf. That doesn't just happen. But he didn't have a title. And the quotes from Columbia University Apartheid Divest, people that are inclined to support him because they look at him, they feel threatened. They don't feel like, oh, that's only like a bad guy. They say, well, those aren't his quotes. How do we know that he controlled that social media page? To me, if you're one of the leaders of that group, obviously if you're negotiating on their behalf, then you believe in that stuff because they're posting it so consistently over and over again. Don't tell me you didn't see it.
Right.
But that's the problem, is that they're trying to get rid of titles and attributing quotes to individuals. And it's a smart strategy. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. A lot of the groups like Center for Constitutional Rights that are coming to his legal defense are pro-Hamas. Like they made the legal case for the October 7th attacks after it happened. That's how they responded. Very few people know that. And you wouldn't think of it when you see on your screen Center for Constitutional Rights. Like you think, oh, those are legal experts, right, and they're defending this kid. And look at this poor guy, and they don't have a quote come from his. So I totally understand why people are rallying to his side, because you have to work a little bit more to get to this realization that people are resistant to, because you don't want to think that of someone. You don't want to think that they believe these things. So you're going to have a high threshold, and the evidence against them just hasn't been distributed out there enough for people to be aware of it. So that inclination that they have to not believe someone is so evil, that dominates their thought process. I understand it. We need to do a better job, is what I'm saying.
Let me ask you a question. I just wondering, where you see things going. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Several years ago, there was Muslim, Palestinian, I don't know, I think resident doctor in Cleveland who put out a tweet or a post, something on social media that she's looking forward to injecting Jewish patients with poison. Okay, this was the first one. She got busted. And I said then, she isn't the only one out there doing it. She's the first one to be stupid enough to get caught. But there is plenty more like her, and now it's coming out everywhere. Doctors in America, doctors in Canada. You saw it in Australia. Lawyers all over. So I'm saying for Jews, certainly, and this is not hyperbole, and I'm not fear mongering, but for many Jews, we know that our days in America are numbered. Within a few more elections, it's going to be chaos here. Where do you see things going in this country? Again, we've got Trump now. He's done in another 3 years. Whether it's J.D. Vance, whether it's Marco Rubio or Ron DeSantis, who knows? But these people are not quitting. And you've got David Hogg, the DNC, whether they get rid of him or not, but he's, wants to primary Democrats who are not crazy. Where do you see the trend going now, since this is not anymore a one-off or just a few crazy Marxists?
So I would say I'm engrossed in left-wing chats. So I'm stepping outside the bubble that I would be predisposed to get an idea. So I have a basis for saying this. I'm not under the impression that the anti-Semitism on the left is increasing anymore. I think it's topped out. And that's partially because Israel's kicked the living crap out of its enemies to such a degree that people are not chatting as much. Morale is low. I mean, they won't say it, but I can tell by their activity. I can tell by their lame spin, because Israel's successes are like impossible to spin into saying, oh, it's a defeat. Like it's just so overwhelming. And people want to be part of causes that win. And it's become clear this one's not going to win. At the same time, there is a huge gap that I think most people who are predisposed to conservative, pro-Trump ecosystems don't see that is on the left with the Democrats. Like there's the anti-Semitic, anarchist, communist elements that maybe talk about and demonize the left even more than they do the right. I mean, they hate them. And so there's a element of the left that says, well, these so-called pro-Palestinian extremists, many of them did not vote for Kamala Harris. We need to win them over. And then there's going to be others that say, we can't win them over. Look at their demands. They're crazy. Like you could abandon Israel and there'd be a million other things that we can't bring them in for. I think ultimately the left is going to realize that. And the Antifa type groups that's going to escalate. They're targeting of the left for sure. On the right, I do see it increasing. I'm sorry. Like I've followed these chats for so long. I was one of the few people that out there when Tucker Carlson was saying the white supremacist threat is a myth. It doesn't exist.
Right.
I was like, I'm in the chats. I see thousands of people there. I've reported hundreds of, it would be hundreds of like white supremacist types plotting violence and criminality. So I knew it was growing. The left exaggerates it for political purposes, but it's big, it's bad, and it's growing. And now you're seeing it with people like Candace Owens, even Theo Vaughn, even though he's not being anti-Semitic, but he's being anti-Israel. A lot of the narratives that come from the anti-Semites on what we'll call the right are becoming mainstreamed, even if the explicit anti-Semitism is not. The explicit anti-Semitism is also increasing, though. When you look at Candace Owens, like that's anti-Semitic. Theo Vaughn, is that anti-Semitic? No, but it's anti-Israel. So you're seeing the narrative travel that is growing. For the nation overall, the big trend we're heading towards, I know it sounds alarmist, but I say this based off of studying patterns in the Middle East. We're heading towards like a balkanization along political lines, because politics is the new religion, religious lines, racial lines. If we continue to allow the bad guys to dominate the narratives and more people get driven to that, and they start believing, well, the U.S. has failed because of that group or that group, and the conclusion is going to be, well, we can't be in the same country as them. We need our own. So when these extremists say that we can make America collapse and rip itself apart, I don't think that's crazy. Their goals are crazy and immoral, but their strategy to defeat the United States is not crazy. So the question is, eventually it's going to get really bad at some point. I think people aren't going to wake up and think it's really bad. Will Americans at that point recognize there's the seditionist movement versus everyone else who operates in good faith? Liberal, conservative, Christian, Jew, atheist, people who want good faith dialogue and just want to figure things out for the good of everybody. And then the seditionist movement that wants to rip everything apart. What conclusion will the average American reach? Will they say, oh, well, the extremists are right, that we just need to split the country up and maybe chaos is a good thing? Or will they say, the way I view the conflicts in the U.S. was wrong. It's actually this paradigm. And the American people will decide at that point what the future of the United States is.
Okay, so we got a few minutes left. Let me ask you a question, just because I was many years ago when Tucker Carlson was the token conservative at MSNBC. He had the 10 o'clock slot. He interviewed me. I had written a book about Al Franken. So he was the first major network host to have me. So I kind of always liked him, and then I loved him on Fox News. What happened to him?
I try to analyze body language and patterns in speech. Over the years, it's been helpful. It seemed he was getting more conspiratorial while he was at Fox, but the mannerisms that define him, like the manic weird laugh and certain tics and how he demonizes everyone that disagrees with him, it always goes to, oh, well, that person disagrees because their agenda is to get everyone into war and they want young boys and girls to die. Like, that's all dramatically increased after he got fired from Fox. And I think he snapped, and that's why, and he doesn't realize it, and that's why he's now claiming that demons are scratching him in the middle of the night. I don't know if you saw it. He literally said that. Like, literal demons came in the middle of the night and scratched him and made him bleed. So there's other stuff going on there.
Okay, it's a pity because, I mean, so many people in my community, I mean, we really liked him. You know, he was never a big pro-Israel
I still
cheerleader.
like him on a certain level, you know? I like his conversations. I think he'd be funny.
Yeah. You know, listen, he was never a Sean Hannity. I mean, Fox News has some real strong pro-Israel cheerleaders. But as long as he wasn't bashing Israel, I was okay with it. I didn't need him to be a cheerleader necessarily. But once he just started kind of just giving platforms to people like Roger Waters and then people who, you know, said things about Winston Churchill, and I said, you know what, it breaks my heart, you know, but whatever. Anywho,
Alexander Dugin, if I may just jump in real quick, because it's an important point. He's like the top propagandist, let's say, for the Russian government. He's known as Putin's brain. And this is a guy that, especially in like white supremacists and like the far right circles, they always talk about Dugin. And he's now appearing a lot on Alex Jones's show. He was on Tucker's show. Glenn Greenwald interviewed him. He's like really becoming a celebrity, but he's anti-American.
Right.
He's known to be the guy that promotes the Russian ideology. And he has said, what is his plan to defeat America? To empower and inflame all the voices of internal hatred and division. Right. So, like, Alex Jones is going to his event. He is like, his name appeared on lists of speakers. So I'm assuming that that's true for Dugin's event in Russia. Like, it blows my mind that people, you know, this guy is basically an intelligence agent of the foreign government that says they hate the U.S. He says in his own words, as you can see in a Google search, that he's picking out the bad guys and wants to inflame the extremes. That's why he's coming to you. And you embrace him? Like, I never thought I'd see that in my life. I thought that the Russian influence agents would always have to be a little bit more covert than that. I never thought you would see influential people knowing that someone is a radical anti-American extremist, speak on behalf of the Russian government, wanting to subvert America, and they say, you know what, that's my guy. I'm going to promote him.
Right. Ryan Mauro, you have done incredible research. It's an honor to have met you. I don't know why we didn't have you on before, but maybe we took Mark. Next time you go on with Mark Levin, you tell me you were on Alan Skorski Reports.
I'll tell him. It'll be the first thing I say.
Listen, thank you so much. Listen, I want to stay in touch with you because your work is so vital. And, you know, we need to get you. Have you testified before Congress, just out of curiosity, with all this material?
I'd like to, but I actually haven't, no.
Okay, that's got to be the next step. Anyhow, young man, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks.